During the recent attacks on Jenin in the West Bank, I noticed some people online questioning the idea that Jenin is a refugee camp and saying, look at this place, they've got houses and everything, the place has been built up. Those Palestinian refugees have been living there for 75 years. After 75 years, do you not think you might have laid a few bricks and built something slightly more durable than a tent? And I can remember the first time I visited the West Bank, and I didn't know exactly what to expect from a refugee camp. And I remember asking the taxi driver as we were heading towards the border, what are the camps like? What's the situation? And he was telling me the roof, zinco roof. The roof is made of zinc. So obviously it's basic conditions. And these people have been living there for 75 years in the hope of returning to the homes that they were kicked out of. And very often the allocation for the refugee camp will only be a certain area, like, for example, 1 square kilometer. I remember hearing this in Lebanon, actually, in Barajne Palestinian camp. And don't forget that the Palestinians are living in camps not just in the occupied Palestinian territories, but in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and elsewhere. And when these camps were first set up, the Palestinians thought they would be returning to their homes. That was always the ambition. That was always the dream. Whether they were living in a camp in the West Bank, which was administered by Jordan from 1948 until the Six-Day War in 1967, or if they were living further afield in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria. And the Palestinians in those countries received different treatment. It's hard to say where they were treated the best. Some might say Syria. Certainly the Palestinians living in Lebanon have lived as second-class citizens for generations, for decades now. They've never been granted Lebanese citizenship. And that's because they exist in this hope, perhaps a vain hope, of returning to the homes that they left in 1948. And people question whether there was ever a state called Palestine, or when the identity first appeared, and when the notion of Palestinians, as we understand the name to mean in the modern sense, actually came about. But if you ask these people living in Barajne and Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon, where are you from? They might not say, I'm from Palestine. They say, I'm from Haifa, or I'm from Jaffa, or I'm from Safed, or whatever town their ancestors were kicked out of during the Nakba. That's where they feel that they are from. And they feel they have a right to go back there, regardless of what state that town or city currently lies within. And many of those refugees who were attacked in Jenin, within their family, they will have retained the keys to the houses that they were expelled from in 1948. And you might say, isn't it time to give up? 75 years later, 3/4 of a century later, why are you clinging to this idea of going back to somewhere that you've never been to, somewhere your parents have never been to, and probably it was your grandparents who were kicked out of that town back then? Isn't it time to move on? Well, the thing is, the way it works, any person in the world, living anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter if they're Jewish or not, all they need is one Jewish grandparent. If you have one provable Jewish grandparent, then the right of return allows you to go back and live in Haifa, live in Jaffa, live in Jerusalem, live anywhere in historic Palestine, including perhaps in some of the settlements that are built right next door to Jenin, right on top of the people living in Hebron. So if any person in the world with one Jewish grandparent, regardless of whether they're religious or not, if you have one Jewish grandparent, you can go and live anywhere in historic Palestine. But there are people alive today born in Haifa, born in Jaffa, and they can't go back there. Isn't that the double standard? Isn't that one of the injustices. I mean, let's look at it. For example, someone like David Beckham, who apparently regards himself as part of the British Jewish community because of his Jewish grandfather. And good for him. That's great that he celebrates his culture, his heritage, and his lineage. I think that's really good that he's outspoken about that. But because of that one grandparent, he can go and live anywhere in historic Palestine tomorrow, but people that were born there or who have a grandparent from there cannot. Who else? Simon Cowell, for example, found out later in life that he has some Jewish heritage, and because of that he would be able to go tomorrow and make Aliyah and go and live anywhere in the Holy Land. But people that were born there, if they are Palestinian, without that Jewish heritage, they are unable to return.